Mercedes' delight at a surprise 1-2 at the Belgian Grand Prix quickly turned to anguish after George Russell was disqualified from a hard-fought win. Mercedes winning a Formula 1 race is no longer the absurd fantasy that it was a few months ago, but its initial 1-2 at Spa was still unexpected. The shock value of that though was quickly surpassed when the stewards disqualified Russell just hours after the flag, ensuring teammate Lewis Hamilton won after all. Hamilton was crestfallen after the race, believing that his second win of the season had been taken from under him by a superbly ambitious one-stop strategy from Russell. But it was Russell's turn to despair when the stewards deemed his Mercedes to be under the required weight limit after the race. So how did Mercedes fall foul of such a simple F1 rule, and where on earth did its 1-2 earning pace come from? Let's start off with why Russell lost his win. His car was examined by the FIA after the race, with the technical delegate noting Russell's Mercedes was initially weighed at 798 kilograms. But that's the minimum weight the car must be without fuel on board, and after 2.8 litres of fuel were extracted from the car for the required post-race checks for compliance, the W15 weighed in at 796.5 kilograms, 1.5 kilograms below the limit. This was a black and white breach of the technical regulations, for which Mercedes offered no mitigating circumstances, and admitted it was a genuine error, so Russell was disqualified. Mercedes team boss Toto Wolff struggled to offer an explanation in his media session after the race, understandably downbeat that news of Russell's investigation had overshadowed what was initially the team's first 1-2 in almost 2 years. Wolff confirmed there was no damage on Russell's car and said there was no excuse for the car being underweight, something his old sparring partner Christian Horner called a mistake in Mercedes' calculations. Mercedes already broke its win drought at Austria last month and won straight after at Silverstone, but nobody expected its Spa triumph. The team looked in big trouble on Friday, as Red Bull and McLaren looked likely to continue their recent front-running battle at Spa, even with Max Verstappen having to take a 10th-place grid penalty. Verstappen topped qualifying by over 6/10, raising the likelihood of a third straight comeback win from a grid penalty at Spa, while McLaren's own chances were boosted by a more race-leaning setup. Hamilton and Russell took 3rd and 6th on the grid, but neither were dreaming of victory on Sunday, and were instead anticipating a swift Verstappen fightback. Hamilton predicted even fighting for a podium would be really tough, considering Verstappen and the McLarens behind had faster cars. But neither Mercedes would have been up there without some crucial changes on Friday night. Much of Mercedes' progress this season has come from a steady stream of upgrades since Miami 3 months ago, and that has gradually pushed the car forward. At Spa, the team abandoning a new floor after Friday proved to be something of a red herring amid its turnaround. Among the upgrades at Spa were new designs to create additional load on the front of the floor and increase the diffuser's effectiveness. This was mainly about adding downforce, but there were warning signs on a difficult Friday as Hamilton and Russell were both more than a second off the pace with signs of problematic bouncing and balance issues. So Mercedes opted to remove the floor and some accompanying bodywork to give itself a known baseline for the rest of the weekend, especially as rain was forecasted for qualifying. That removed a variable and helped Hamilton qualify 3rd, and although Hamilton felt the opportunity came largely because of the rain, his performance in the race indicates that the change of aerospec and some other setup adjustments put the Mercedes in a much better window. An important question was whether the upgrade was actually the cause of the problems Mercedes suffered on Friday or not. Russell was pretty confident those upgrades were working as expected, and after the race Wolff declared removing the upgrade wasn't the reason for the turnaround. He believes the team tripped over an unrelated mechanical issue and insisted the upgraded floor will be back on the car at Zandvoort after the summer break. That would suggest it's not a sign that a good streak of effective upgrades has ended. But either way, this performance reaffirmed how competitive its car already is without the upgrades and how monumental Mercedes' turnaround in 2024 has been. This should have always been Hamilton's second victory of 2024. He'd outqualified Russell and had looked the stronger Mercedes driver throughout the weekend. Hamilton was leading the race in the early stages, while Russell was seemingly an outside contender for the podium at best. But Russell had different ideas with a genius one-stop strategy, the push for which he led from the cockpit, clocking midway in his second stint that he was going to be able to take his hard tyres 34 laps. Mercedes' own simulations told it Russell would finish in 5th on either the 1 or 2 stop strategy, but Russell's hards lasted remarkably well. Russell said it felt like driving in the simulator when he was leading, and he couldn't understand why a one-stop wouldn't be possible. He essentially defied the pre-race expectations of Pirelli, Mercedes and the other teams, as demonstrated by the fact that none of the other frontrunners committed to the one-stopper. And even when Hamilton was consistently 6 to 7/10 a lap faster than Russell when he was catching him, once he got there he couldn't do anything to threaten Russell. With good traction out of all the key corners, Russell was able to keep his teammate at bay, and it never realistically looked like Hamilton was going to be able to take the lead. The job Russell did surprised many in Mercedes and elsewhere in the paddock. He even earned plaudits from rivals, with McLaren team boss Andrea Stella praising Russell's supreme tyre management. While the win doesn't stand, it's still a significant intra-team victory, given there's only half a season left for Russell to prove he's still Mercedes' spearhead when Hamilton leaves and another potential megastar in Kimi Antonelli likely joins him.
McLaren only had the fourth fastest car in qualifying at Spa, but in the race it looked like Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris were actually quickest. The problem is neither of them could quite do enough with that to take the win. Norris kind of removed himself from contention early on. That was when he was on the outside as Piastri went inside into turn one at the start. Norris understeered a little bit, dropped the wheels on the gravel, fell back and never quite recovered, found himself in DRS trains and stuck behind his would-be title rival Max Verstappen. As for Piastri, it took a while for his race to really get going, and there were two key moments that cost him race time that ultimately he'll be ruining at the end, given how close he got to the Mercedes. One was overshooting ever so slightly, coming in for his final pit stop. That cost him a couple of seconds there, and then again he lost maybe a second or two in race time, taking one more lap than he wanted to and really needed to clear Charles Leclerc's Ferrari. So by the time Piastri was in clear air and was able to catch the battling Mercedes, even though they weren't quite fighting wheel to wheel, he just ran out of time. It's frustrating for McLaren. It will probably go down as another near miss, another race in which they've had probably the fastest car and not quite gotten away with the result that they actually deserved on pace, but not in terms of execution. The only silver lining for them is that they have at least taken a few more points out of Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship.
Red Bull dominated qualifying at Spa, and even out of form Sergio Perez was able to qualify third fastest. So why did its victory bid, well, not fall apart, but just never even get going? Verstappen was removed from the picture with a 10th-place grid penalty, but that's not stopped him in recent years at Spa when he's breezed past the opposition to win after a grid drop. That wasn't possible this time around though, because he just didn't have the car advantage anymore to make it possible, and also because overtaking was much harder than expected in the race. Running a slightly bigger rear wing than rivals meant even with still the best air efficiency in the field, Verstappen couldn't really attack on the straights. He just got stuck on DRS trains. Verstappen had talked of the race being about damage limitation, so this probably wasn't a great surprise to him, but it would have shocked rivals who genuinely thought Verstappen would still come through and be a big threat for victory. In the end, we never really saw what Verstappen was capable of, given he didn't have the pace advantage or the straight line speed to clear his rivals with ease. Verstappen ended up running at the pace of others. Even the interloping Ferrari of Charles Leclerc was too quick to be overtaken before the end of the race. But at least Verstappen was up there in the mix, and he even managed to beat Norris's McLaren. Teammate Perez had by far the more disappointing race. It's one thing for the Red Bull that started 11th not being able to win this Grand Prix, but it's another for the other one who started in second to somehow fall to 8th at the line. This was a long way from the result Perez and Red Bull expected. It thought 3rd and 5th were realistic from its starting positions, and it may well turn out to be his final race for the team. Perez's poor form is what has let McLaren start to put pressure on it in the Constructors' Championship, and that's left Red Bull seriously considering what to do with him. Talks are planned between team principal Christian Horner and special advisor Helmut Marko as early as Monday after Spa. Perez might be dropped with Daniel Ricciardo as most likely a replacement if Red Bull decides his inconsistency is too big a threat to its championship prospects. And Red Bull's just seen the best and worst of him in one weekend. Leclerc had no right to nick pole position and a podium from a weekend where Ferrari clearly had the 4th fastest car once again. His pole was boosted by a high downforce setup and the mixed conditions that Leclerc believes meant he was fighting for pole rather than for 5th. But Leclerc still delivered a typically special lap when it mattered most to help Ferrari to its biggest high since winning in Monaco. Leclerc expected to go backwards on Sunday, and he did so as soon as lap 3 when Hamilton overtook him for the lead. Leclerc did manage to hold up both Verstappen and Norris for the final third of the race, and with Russell's disqualification, that gives him an unlikely podium. But this weekend wasn't particularly a sign that Ferrari has suddenly overcome its problems and stopped its downward spiral that started after Monaco. Carlos Sainz had a muted run to 7th place, and Leclerc was unimpressed to be so far behind Mercedes, who Ferrari had expected to be scrapping with to be the 3rd fastest car this weekend. Ultimately, Leclerc's pole and podium will stand as a small morale boost before a second half of the season where Ferrari will desperately need to get back on terms with its high-flying rivals.